Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books out loud while stoned. Today, we're going to start part 4. Wait a minute, part 5. Yeah. We're going to start part 5 of Little Blue Book number 4. And it's titled The Age of Reason, written by Thomas Paine. Now, the original Age of Reason, as I've said in every one of these videos, was written in 1792. If I'm wrong, put it in the comments. Alright, so we left off part 4 at the top of page 63. Wait. No. The top of page 62. Let me make sure. Let me go back. Yep. Here's the last sentence. In first chapter of Chronicles, beginning at the 43rd verse. It was with consistency that the writer of the Chronicles could say, as he has said, 1 Chronicles, chapter 1, verse 43, "These are the kings that reigned in Edom, before there reigned any king over the children of Israel." Because he was going to give, and has given, a list of the kings that had reigned in Israel, but as it is impossible that the same expression could have been used before that period, it is as certain as anything can be proved from historical language that this part of Genesis is taken from Chronicles, and that Genesis is not so old as Chronicles, and probably not so old as the book of Homer, or Aesop's fables, admitting Homer to have been, as the tables of chronology state, contemporary with David or Solomon, and Aesop to have lived about the end of the Jewish monarchy. Take away from Genesis the belief that Moses was the author, on which only the strange belief that it is the Word of God has stood, and there remains nothing of Genesis but an anonymous book of stories, fables, and traditionary or invented absurdities, or of downright lies. The story of Eve and the serpent and Noah and his ark drops to a level with the Arabian tales, without the merit of being entertaining, and the account of men living to 800 or 900 years becomes as fabulous as the immortality of the giants of mythology. Besides the character of Moses, as stated in the Bible, it is the most horrid that can be imagined. If those accounts be true, he was the wretch that first began and carried on wars on the score, or on the pretense, of religion, and under that mask, or that infatuation, committed the most unexampled atrocities that are to be found in the history of any nation, of which I will state only one instance. When the Jewish army returned from one of their murdering and plundering excursions, the account goes as follows. Numbers chapter 31, verse 13. And Moses and Eleazar, E-L-A-E-A-Z-E-R, Eleazar, whoever he is, the priest, and all the princes of the congregation went forth to meet them without the camp. And Moses was wroth with the officers of the host, with the captains over thousands and captains over hundreds, which came from the battle. And Moses said unto them, Have ye saved all the women alive? Behold, these caused the children of Israel, though through the counsel of Balaam, to commit trespass against the Lord, in the matter of Peor. And there was a plague among the congregation of the Lord. Now, therefore, kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman that hath known a man by lying with him. But all the women, children, that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. Among the detestable villains that in any period of the world have disgraced the name of man, it is impossible to find a greater than Moses. If this account be true, here is an order to butcher the boys, to massacre the mothers, and debauch the daughters. Let any mother put herself in the situation of those mothers. One child murdered, another destined to violation, and herself in the hands of an executioner. Let any daughter put herself in the situation of those daughters, destined as a prey to the murderers of a mother and a brother. And what will be their feelings? It is in vain that we attempt to impose upon nature, for nature will have her course, and the religion that tortures all her social ties is a false religion. After this detestable order follows an account of the plunder taken, and the manner of dividing it. And here it is that profaneness of priestly hypocrisy increases the catalogue of crimes. Verse 37. And the Lord's tribute of the sheep was 660, and the beeves was 36,000, of which the Lord's tribute was 12, and the asses were 30,000, of which the Lord's tribute was 61, and the persons were 30,000, of which the Lord's tribute was 32. In short, the matters contained in this chapter, as well as in many other parts of the Bible, are too horrid for humanity to read, or for decency to hear. For it appears from the 35th verse of this chapter that the number of women, children consigned to debauchery by the order of Moses was 32,000. People in general know not what wickedness there is in this pretended word of God, brought up in habits of superstition. They take it for granted that the Bible is true and that it is good. They permit themselves not to doubt of it, and they carry the ideas that form of the benevolence of the Almighty to the book which they have been taught to believe was written by His authority. Good heavens! It is quite another thing. It is a book of lies, wickedness, and blasphemy. For what can be greater blasphemy than to ascribe the wickedness of man to the orders of the Almighty? But to return to my subject, that of showing that Moses is not the author of books ascribed to him, and that the Bible was spurious. The two instances I have already given would be sufficient, without any additional evidence to invalidate the authenticity of any book that pretended to be 400 or 500 years more ancient than the matters it speaks of, or refers to as facts. For in the case of pursuing them on to Dan, and of the kings that reigned over the children of Israel, not even the flimsy pretense of prophecies can be pleaded. The expressions are in the preter tense, and it would be downright idiotism to say that a man could prophesy in the preter tense. But there are many other passages scattered throughout those books that unite in the same point of evidence. It is said in Exodus, another of the books ascribed to Moses, chapter 16, verse 34, and the children of Israel did eat manna until they came to a land inhabited. They did eat manna until they came unto the borders of the land of Canaan. Whether the children of Israel ate manna or not, or what manna was, or whether it was anything more than a kind of fungus or small mushroom, or another vegetable, or other vegetable substance common to that part of the country, makes nothing to my argument. All that I can mean to show is that it is not Moses that could write this account, because the account extends itself beyond the life and time of Moses. Moses, according to the Bible, but it is such a book of lies and contradictions that there is no knowing which part to believe and whether any, dies in the wilderness and never came upon the borders of the land of Canaan. And consequently, it could not be he that said what the children of Israel did or what they ate when they came there. This account of eating manna, which they tell us was written by Moses, extends itself to the time of Joshua, the successor of Moses, as appears by the account given in the book of Joshua, after the children of Israel had passed the river Jordan, and came unto the borders of the land of Canaan. Joshua chapter 5, verse 12. And the manna ceased on the morrow, after they had eaten of the old corn of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna any more, but they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. Joshua, according to the first chapter of Joshua, was the immediate successor of Moses. He was, moreover, a military man, which Moses was not, and he continued as chief of the people of Israel 25 years, that is, from the time Moses died, which, according to the Bible chronology, was 1,451 years before Christ, until 1,426 years before Christ, when, according to the same chronology, Joshua died. If, therefore, we find in this book said to have been written by Joshua reference to facts done after the death of Joshua, it is evident that Joshua could not be the author, and also that the book could not have been written till after the time of the latest fact which it records. As to the character of the book, it is horrid. It is a military history of rapine and murder, as savage and brutal as those recorded of his predecessor, in villainy and hypocrisy, Moses, and the blasphemy consists, as in the former books, in ascribing those deeds to the order of the Almighty. In the first place, the book of Joshua, as is the case in the preceding books, is written by the third person, or in the third person. It is the historian of Joshua that speaks, for it would have been absurd and vainglorious that Joshua would say of himself, as is said of him in the last verse of the 6th chapter, that his fame was noised throughout all the country. I have come more immediately to the proof. Pages are starting to separate on this one. In the 24th chapter, verse 31, it is said that Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that overlived Joshua. Now, in the name of common sense, can it be Joshua that relates what people had done after he was dead? This account must not only have been written by some historian that lived after Joshua, but that lived also after the elders that outlived Joshua. There are several passages of a general meaning with respect to time scattered throughout the book of Joshua that carries the time in which the book was written to a distance from the time of Joshua, but without marking by exclusion any particular time, as in the passage above quoted. In that passage, the time that intervened between the death of Joshua and the death of the elders is excluded, descriptively and absolutely, and the evidence substantiates that the book could not have been written till after the death of the last. But though the passages to which I allude, and which I am going to quote, do not designate any particular time by exclusion, they imply a time far more distant than the days of Joshua, than is entertained between the death of Joshua and the death of the elders. Such is the passage, chapter 10, verse 14, where, after giving an account that the sun stood still upon Gideon, and the moon in the valley of Ajalon, at the command of Joshua, a tale only fit to amuse children. The passage says, "And there was no day like that before it, nor after it, that the Lord hearkened to the voice of a..." Bam, turn the page. "To the voice of a man." This tale of the sun standing still upon Mount Gideon, and the moon in the valley of Ajalon, is one of those fables that detects itself. Such a circumstance could not have happened without being known all over the world. One half would have wondered why the sun did not rise, and the other why it did not set, and the tradition of it would have been universal, whereas there is not a nation in the world that knows anything about it. But why must the moon stand still? What occasion could there be for moonlight in the daytime? And that, too, while the sun shined. As a poetical figure, the whole is well enough. It is akin to that in the song of Deborah and Barak. The stars in their courses fought against Sisera. But it is inferior to the figurative declaration of Muhammad to the persons who came to expostulate with him on his going on. "Wert thou," said he, "to come to me with the sun in thy right hand and the moon in thy left, it should not alter my career." For Joshua to have exceeded Muhammad, he should have put the sun and moon, one in each pocket, and carried them as Guy Fawkes carried his dark lantern, and taken them out to shine as he might happen to want them. The sublime and ridiculous are often so nearly related that it is difficult to class them separately. One step above the sublime makes the ridiculous, and one step above the ridiculous makes the sublime again. The account, however, abstracted from the poetical fancy, shows the ignorance of Joshua, for he should have commanded the earth to have stood still. The time implied by the expression after it, that is, after that day, being put in comparison with all the time that passed before it, must, in order to give any expression signification to the passage, mean a great length of time. For example, it would have been ridiculous to have said, so the next day, or the next week, or the next month, or the next year, to give therefore meaning to the passage, comparative with the wonder it relates in the prior time it alludes to. It must mean centuries or years less. Or years, okay. Must mean centuries or years. Less, however, than one would be trifling, and less than two would be barely admirable. Okay, we're going to pause right there, because I have cotton mouth, of course. And we're going to fix that with some hydration. Okay, here we go. A distance but general time is also expressed in the 8th chapter, where after giving an account of the taking of the city of Ai, that's how it's spelled, Ai. It is said, verse 28, and Joshua burned Ai and made it a heap forever, a desolation unto this day. And again, verse 29, where speaking of the king of Ai, whom Joshua had hanged and buried at the entering of the gate, it is said, and he raised thereon a great heap of stones, which remaineth unto this day. That is, unto the day or time in which the writer of the book of Joshua lived. And again, in the 10th chapter, where after speaking of the 5 kings whom Joshua had hanged on 5 trees, and had thrown in a cave, it is said, and he laid great stones on the cave's mouth, which remain unto this very day. In enumerating the several exploits of Joshua and of tribes, and of the places which they conquered or attempted, it is said, chapter 15, verse 63, as for the Jebusites, the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the children of Judea, could not drive them out, but the Jebusites dwell with the children of Judah at Jerusalem until this day. The question upon this passage is, at what time did the Jebusites and the children of Judah dwell together? It's a very good question. At Jerusalem, as this matter occurs again in the 1st chapter of Judges. I shall reserve my observations till I come to that part. Having thus shown from the book of Joshua itself, without any auxiliary evidence whatever, that Joshua is not the author of that book, and that it is anonymous and consequently without authority, I proceed as before mentioned to the book of Judges. The book of Judges is anonymous on the face of it, and therefore even the pretense in wanting to call it the Word of God, it has not so much as a nominal voucher. It is altogether fatherless. The book begins with the same expression as the book of Joshua. That of Joshua begins chapter 1, verse 1. Now, after the death of Moses, etc., and this of the Judges begins. Now, after the death of Joshua, etc. This and the similarity of style between the two books indicate that they are the work of the same author. But who was it? Who was he? Is altogether unknown. The only point that the book proves is that the author lived long after the time of Joshua. For though it begins as if it followed immediately after his death, the 2nd chapter is an epitome or abstract of the whole book, which, according to the Bible chronology, extends its history through a space of 306 years. That is, from the death of Joshua, 1,426 years before Christ, to the death of Samson, 1,120 years before Christ, and only 25 years before Saul, went to seek his father's asses and was made king. But there is good reason to believe that it was not written till the time of David at least, and that the book of Joshua was not written before the same time. In the first chapter of Judges, the writer, after announcing the death of Joshua, proceeds to tell what happened between the children of Judah and the native inhabitants of the land of Canaan. In this statement, the writer, having abruptly mentioned Jerusalem in the 7th verse, says immediately after in the 8th verse, by way of explanation, now that the children of Judah had fought against Jerusalem and taken it. Consequently, this book could not have been written before Jerusalem had been taken. The reader will recollect the quotation I have just before made from the 15th chapter of Joshua, verse 63, where it said that the Jebusites dwell with the children of Judah at Jerusalem at this day, meaning the time when the book of Joshua was written. The evidence I have already produced to prove that the book I have hitherto treated of was not written by persons to whom they are ascribed, nor till many years after their death, if such persons ever lived, is already so abundant that I can afford to admit this passage with less weight than I am entitled to draw from it. For the case is that so far as the Bible can be credited as in history, the city of Jerusalem was not taken till the time of David, and consequently the book of Joshua and of Judges were not written till after the commencement of the reign of David, which was 370 years after the death of Joshua. The name of the city that was afterwards called Jerusalem was originally called Jebus, or Jebusi, and was the capital of the Jebusites. The account of David's taking this city is given in chapter 2, in Samuel chapter 5, verse 4, and see also in 1 Chronicles chapter, 24, verse 4. Oh, no, there is no mention, I almost read that over again. There's no mention in any part of the Bible that it was ever, authenticity. Strange writing for the 1700s, or 1800s. But if we go further into those books, the evidence is still more positive that Samuel is not the writer of them. For they relate things that did not happen till several years after the death of Samuel. Samuel died before Saul. For the first Samuel, chapter 10, 25, 6, 7, 8, 28, tells that Saul and the witch of Endor conjured Samuel up after he was dead. Yet the history of the matters contained in those books is extended through the remaining part of Saul's life and to the latter end of the life of David, who succeeded Saul. The account of the death and burial of Samuel, a thing which he could not write himself, is related in the 25th chapter of the first book of Samuel, and the chronology affixed to this chapter makes this to be 1060 years before Christ. Yet the history of this first book is brought down to 1056 years before Christ. That is, till the death of Saul, which was not till 4 years after the death of Samuel. The second book of Samuel begins with an account of things that did not happen till 4 years after Samuel was dead. For it begins with the reign of David, who succeeded Saul. And it goes on to the end of David's reign, which was 43 years after the death of Samuel. And therefore, the books are in themselves positive evidence that they were not written by Samuel. I have now gone through all the books in the first part of the Bible to which the names of persons are affixed as being the authors of those books, and which the church, styling itself a Christian church, have imposed upon the world as the writings of Moses, Joshua, and Samuel, and I have detected and proved the falsehood of these impositions. And now, ye priests of every description, who have preached and written against the former part of the Age of Reason, what have ye to say? Excuse me, and we'll pause there because it's cotton mouth. And we'll read this page, and I think I'll end this chapter. Will ye, with all this mass of evidence against you and staring you in the face, still have the assurance to march into your pulpits and continue to impose these books on your congregation as the work of inspired penmen, and the word of God, when it is as evident as demonstration can make truth appear, that the persons who ye say are the authors are not the authors, and that ye know not who the authors are? What shadow of pretense have ye now to produce for continuing the blasphemous fraud? What have ye stood, oh, there goes the ye's, what have ye still to offer against the pure and moral religion of deism, in support of your system of falsehood, idolatry, and pretended revelation? Had the cruel and murderous orders with which the Bible is filled, and numberless torturing executions of men, women, and children, in consequence of those orders, been ascribed to some friend whose memory you revered, you would have glowed with satisfaction at detecting the falsehood in the charge, and gloried in defending his injured fame. It is because ye are sunk in the cruelty of superstition, or feel no interest in the honor of your creation, that ye listen to the horrid tales of the Bible, or hear them with calloused indifference. The evidence I have produced, and shall still produce in the course of this work, to prove that the Bible is without authority, will, whilst it wounds the stubbornness of a priest, relieve and tranquilize the minds of millions. It will free them from all those hard thoughts of the Almighty which priestcraft and the Bible have infused into their minds. And turning of the page. Okay. And which stood in everlasting opposition to their ideas of his moral justice and benevolence. I come now to the 2 books of Kings and the 2 books of Chronicles. Those books are altogether historical, and are chiefly confined to the lives and actions of the Jewish kings, who in general were a parcel of rascals. But these are matters with which we have no more concern than we have with the Roman emperors, or Homer's accounts of the Trojan War, besides which, as those works are anonymous, and as we know nothing of the writer or of his character, it is impossible for us to know what degree of credit to give to the matters related therein. Like all other ancient histories, they appear to be a jumble of fable and fact, and of probable and of improbable things, but which, distance of time and place, and chance of circumstance in the world, have rendered obsolete and uninteresting. The chief use I shall make of those books will be that of comparing them with each other, and with other parts of the Bible, to show the confusion, contradiction, and cruelty in this pretended Word of God. The first book of Kings begins with the reign of Solomon, which, according to the Bible chronology, was 1015 years before Christ, and the second book ends 588 years before Christ, being a little after the reign of Zedekiah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, after taking Jerusalem and conquering the Jews, carried captive to Babylon. The 2 books include a space of 427 years. The 2 books of Chronicles are a history of the same time, and in general of the same persons by another author. For it would be absurd to suppose that the same author wrote the history twice over. The first book of Chronicles, after giving the genealogy from Adam to Saul, which takes up the first 9 chapters, pardon me, begins with the reign of David, and the last book ends, as in the last book of Kings, soon after the reign of Zedekiah, about 588 years before Christ. The 2 last verses of the last chapter bring the history 52 years more forward, that is, to 536. But these verses do not belong to the book, as I shall show when I come to speak of the book of Ezra. The 2 books of Kings, besides the history of Saul, David, and Solomon, who reigned over all Israel, contain an abstract of the lives of 17 kings and 1 queen, who are styled kings of Judah, and of 19 who are styled kings of Israel. For the Jewish nation, immediately on the death of Solomon, split into 2 parties, who chose separate kings, who carried on most rancorous wars against each other. Those 2 books are little more than a history of assassinations, treachery, and wars, the cruelties that the Jews had accustomed themselves to practice on the Canaanites, whose country they had savagely invaded under a pretended gift from God. They afterwards practiced as furiously on each other. Scarcely half their kings died a natural death, and in some instances whole families were destroyed to secure possession to the successor, who, after a few years, and sometimes only a few months or less, shared the same fate. In the 10th chapter of the 2nd book of Kings, an account is given of 2 baskets full of children's heads, 70 in number, being exposed at the entrance of the city. They were the children of Ahab, and were murdered by the orders of Jehu, whom Elijah, the pretended man of God, had anointed to be king over Israel on purpose to commit this bloody deed and assassinate his predecessor. And in the account of the reign of Mahaman, one of the kings of Israel, who had murdered Shalom, who had reigned but 1 month, it is said, Kings chapter 15, verse 16, the Menahem smote the city of Tipshah, because they opened not the city to him, and all the women that were therein that were with child were ripped out. Could we permit ourselves to suppose that the Almighty would distinguish any nation of people by the name of his chosen people? We must suppose that people to have been an example to all the rest of the world of the purest piety and humanity, and not such a nation of ruffians and cutthroats as the ancient Jews were. A people who, corrupted by and copying after such monsters and impostors as Moses and Aaron, Joshua, Samuel, and David, had distinguished themselves above all others on the face of the known earth for barbarity and wickedness. If we will not stubbornly shut our eyes and steel our hearts, it is impossible not to see, in spite of all that long-established superstition imposes upon the mind, that the flattering appellations of his chosen people is no other than a lie the priests and leaders of the Jews had invented to cover the baseness of their own characters, and which Christian priests, sometimes as corrupt and often as cruel, have professed to believe. The 2 books of Chronicles are a repetition of the same crimes, but the history is broken in several places by the author leaving out the reign of some of their kings. And in this, as well as in that of Kings, there is such a frequent transition from kings of Judah to the kings of Israel, and from the kings of Israel to the kings of Judah, that the narrative is obscure in the reading. In the same book, the history sometimes contradicts itself. For example, in the 2nd book of Kings, chapter 1, verse 8, we are told, but in rather ambiguous terms, that after the death of Ahaziah, the king of Israel, Jehoram, or Joram, who was of the house of Ahab, reigned in his stead in the 2nd year of Jehoram, or Joram, son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. And in chapter 8, verse 16 of the same book, it is said, and in the 5th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoshaphat, being then king of Judah, began to reign. That is, one chapter says Joram of Judah began to reign in the 2nd year of Joram of Israel, and the other chapter says that Joram of Israel began to reign in the 5th year of Joram of Judah. Several of the most extraordinary matters related in one history as having happened during the reign of such and such of their kings are not to be found in the other. In relating the reign of the same king, for example, the 2 first rival kings after the death of Solomon were Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And in 1 Kings chapter 12 and chapter 13, an account is given of Jeroboam making an offering of burnt incense and that a man who is there, called a man of God, cried out against the altar. Chapter 8, verse 2, O altar, 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 thus saith the Lord, Behold, a child shall be born in the house of David, Joshua by name, and upon thee shall he offer the priest of the high places, and burn incense upon thee, and men's bones shall be burnt. Upon thee. Verse 4. And that's where we'll stop, because we're already 33 minutes into this one. So, that is the end of The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine, Part 5. Thanks for listening, and join me in Part 6 of The Age of Reason. Thanks for listening.